Africa is blessed with sundry wildlife, topography, and adventures. Although most Africans are poor in material wealth, they are rich in optimism, joy, and hospitality. I love their welcoming spirit. The smiles on their faces, despite having so little, attest to their hope and happiness. 6 years ago, in Kenya, I co-founded and became the president of liberators and leaders who come from the remotest parts of Kenya. Back in the 80s, charitable organizations like UNICEF and World Vision regularly on primetime TV appeal to the public to give to poor Africans living in war-torn countries such as Ethiopia and Uganda. I can still remember vividly being glued to my TV set, poignantly watching the horrifying scenes. Emaciated Ethiopian children with swollen bellies lying on their deathbeds. African families crowded in slums. Deeply etched into my memories are the stories. I remember the father who had to carry his eldest son in the desert for miles so that he could receive treatment for his son's foot that was rotting away by a simple infection gone bad. I remember the mother forced to sacrifice one of her twins because she could not produce enough milk in her breast to feed both her children. I pled with my parents with tears in my eyes to give, but for some reason or another, they were not as concerned like I was. They were kind of hesitant to give. My father actually said, your intentions are noble, but they might just take your money away. Despite my strong desire to give, I needed to be careful on how I give. At the same time, I knew it was not right for my father and for me to just sit on our hands. We had to do something about this. People were literally dying. So I made an oath to myself. When I'm older and smarter, I'm going to do something about this. Years ago, I was sent to volunteer at a school in Nairobi, Kenya for poor refugee children from Ethiopia, Uganda, and Somalia. When I first arrived to the school, I was a little dismayed. I was expecting to see the impoverished-looking children I saw on TV, but instead, I was greeted by children with large smiles, all decked out in bright clothing. My first thought was, I think I've been sent to the wrong place. My purpose was to help the poorest of the poor. But when we visited their homes, my initial perception completely changed. I remember our first home visitation. We arrived to Kibera, the largest urban slum in Africa. I knew immediately my student, despite their glowing smiles and their shiny clothing, did come from the worst of slums. The sights, the stench, my goodness, the horrible unsanitary conditions attested to it all. I remember Nantutu, one of the students I'm very close to, we went to her house, and her house was just a mere shack, a small shack, and we crowded into her house, and I remember the father telling us his despairing story of how he and his family had to escape from his home country and come to Kenya to find refuge. He ended up in the inner city of Nairobi. He couldn't afford to pay the rent. He had difficulty finding work, in spite of his dire condition. I was surprised to notice he and his family were hopeful. They were happy. They were actually even grateful. This is when it struck me, you don't need money to be happy. What I realized from my first trip to Kenya is that if I simply just sent food and money to the poor, I wouldn't be helping them in the long run. Many repeatedly told me that you don't want poor people to be dependent on assistance. You want them to become independent so that they can help themselves for the long run. So I wrestled with the question, what is the best way we can help the poor? Perhaps the best way to help the poor is as the adage goes. Give a man a fish, you save him for a day. Teach a man how to fish, you save him for a lifetime. Seeing the value of education, I became a professional high school teacher in Canada in my early 20s. During my summer vacation, I continued to go to Kenya to help out the school. Just reflecting back to all that director has done for that school, I'm so impressed. From the time she spearheaded the school, I have seen her grow the school from 30 students in 1994 to over 500 students as of 2019. Word about her good work spread even to the President of Kenya. The President has even given her a large plot of land to expand her school. Over the past 25 years, close to 10,000 African students have received education from her school. As a teacher and an education professor, today I of course place a high premium on education. So I asked many African leaders, what is the biggest problem in Kenya? And I was expecting to hear poverty, but what they repeatedly told me was it was corruption.